Been driving all along, feel like I'm dreaming. Okay.
Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is Street Apologist Live. I'm your host, Vocab Malone. This is where we serve the underserved and look into the overlooked. You guys know today is Tuesday, October 24th, 2023, and we're going to be talking about the actual facts regarding Palestine. Very relevant, and I can think of no one better than to do that than today's guest, Robert Spencer. Welcome to Street Apologist Live. I am so glad to have you on. How you doing?
Good to see you, my friend. Thank you.
You said I'm looking more Islamic these days?
Yes, you look very, very halal with the beard and just the overall look. Really, you could just get together with Daniel Hakikaju and you'd be two peas in a pod.
What should we talk about? Should we discuss jihad or?
Yeah, I'm against it.
Well, listen, I bet you've been very busy as the director of Jihad Watch these days. Tell me what your past 2 weeks have looked like.
Well, there has been so much news. We have stepped up the coverage at jihadwatch.org, where if you are not already following us, you can get the full story about what's happening in Israel, happening elsewhere with jihad these days. Yeah, we've been running ragged, vocab, with trying to keep up with everything, and then pause to talk to our friends like you and everybody else. And so busy times. It's a shame that it's under these circumstances that we get busy, and then when times are better, we don't have to work as hard. But I suppose you could say the same thing about doctors and lawyers. So there you go.
Yeah, lawyers. It's the nine that give the one the bad name,
Yeah, exactly.
But
maybe it's doctors. Anyway.
So if people want to support your work, how do they do that?
Yeah, we're at Patreon, and also if you go to jihadwatch.org, you can donate to Jihad Watch itself at Anodot, and the link is right there on the front page on the right-hand side, and thank you.
Yes, sir. What are the books or works or videos that people have been most asking you about with everything that's happened? Are there certain things they're specifically focusing on that you've done?
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2019, which is called The Palestinian Delusion, The Catastrophic History of the Middle East Peace Process. And it tells the truth about why the conflict is going on, what's really happening there, the kind of thing you're not going to hear from CNN or MSNBC or Fox even. And so a lot of people have been interested in that. Also in the Critical Quran, which is an honest translation of the Quran, plus the commentary that shows how mainstream Muslims understand it. Those two books, there's been tremendous interest in over the last few weeks. Also, the history of jihad, which is the only history of jihad that is currently available. And that shows that what happened in Israel on October 7th is unfortunately quite common. This happened throughout the world at various times.
And so it's this book right here that, of course, we also are talking about today. The Palestinian Delusion. It's quite dense. I just finished through the chapter where you're going back and forth with details about the negotiations between the Camp David and then the Oslo Accords. That chapter, am I getting it right in the neighborhood? That's what I've been reading.
Camp David was Carter and Egypt's Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, the Prime Minister of Israel. Oslo came a little later, was Bill Clinton with Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin.
When I look at this book, part of it's depressing because it seems like there is no true solution, but I think I already knew that. Theologically, I would say till the Messiah returns because of the underlying issues. But in your book, you say there's the key to the conflict is described in the book. What is the key to the conflict, Robert Spencer?
The key to the conflict is understanding that it's religious and not political. that it's not about land, that it's not about settlements, it's not about anything that can be solved by negotiations. It is about Islam. And Islam teaches, chapter 2, verse 191 of the Quran, drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, it's important to emphasize that it's a historical myth that the Israelis drove the Arabs out of Palestine. Actually, they left voluntarily because the Arab Higher Committee told them to leave in 1948 when the state of Israel was declared independent. Then the Arabs declared war, 5 Arab countries surrounding Israel, and the Arab Higher Committee said, get out of the Arab League, get out of the area, we will destroy Israel, and then you can come back when things are quiet. Well, they lost the war, so they didn't come back, but now it has become a historical myth that they were driven out, and thus they have a responsibility before Allah to drive the Israelis out.
Yeah, I remember reading that chapter, and they were basically telling the Arabs of Palestine, "Hey, get out, come back after we've taken care of this." And that, of course, didn't happen. As far as them taking care of it, as far as winning. And I was going through, the part where it seems like the Russians were frustrated. It's like, hey, we've gave them. In a different time of the conflict, I'm fast forwarding here, but in the book I read this. The Russians are frustrated. We gave them all this equipment and everything, and you guys still can't win. We can't come over there and fight for you.
That's very important, Kev. That's a very important thing that people don't know. That was in 1973. The October War, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, happened when Egypt and some of the other Arab countries in the area invaded Israel by surprise on Yom Kippur, like this recent attack was also on a Jewish holy day. And the thing about Egypt at that time was that it was part of the Soviet bloc in the Cold War. During the Cold War, pretty much the whole world was divided up. You were either with the United States or with the Soviet Union, and Egypt was with the Soviet Union. And what I've got in the book is a transcript of a Politburo meeting where Leonid Brezhnev, the premier of the Soviet Union, is talking to Andrei Gromyko, who was the foreign minister, and the other members of the Politburo. And he's saying, Sadat, he was calling me in the middle of the night and saying, you've got to help us. You got to send soldiers. You got to send tanks. We're losing. And Brezhnev was disgusted because he said, we've given them more than we've given the Vietnamese. Yeah. And they still lost. And he said, there's no more. We're going to make peace with Israel, and Egypt can just take it or leave it. And so Sadat realized that the writing was on the wall. And what he did, people don't realize this, what he did was he switched sides and joined the American side of the Cold War, because he knew that if it was going to be all about negotiations, that he could get a better deal negotiating with Israel if he did it on America's side. And then the Americans would press Israel to give the concessions, and they would agree, because the United States is practically their only friend. And it worked like a charm. He switched sides. I remember this. I was a young man at the time, and I remember how the press, suddenly they loved Sadat, and he had taken his country courageously out of the Soviet orbit and made friends with America, and he was a great far-seeing statesman. We didn't know at the time. It was all calculated. He was a very clever man. And what he did was he charmed Jimmy Carter, who was the president of the United States, 77 to 81, and he made Carter at the Camp David Accords. He so had him wrapped around his finger that Carter said, I'll do whatever you want, and we'll get what you want out of this guy. Begin, they both ended up essentially bullying into agreeing to accept the existence of a separate people called the Palestinians, which had just been made up, and to agreeing to vacate the Sinai, which Israel had taken after the 67 war, quite reasonably, to secure its borders, and made all kinds of other concessions to the Egyptians. And so Sadat won at the negotiating table what he couldn't win on the battlefield. And so he's this wonderful statesman and far-seeing man of peace. And really, he was just calculating to weaken Israel, and he did it very effectively.
Yeah, I remember reading the back and forth in the book about exactly what you're talking about, and how he would kind of talk about Carter behind his back, saying he was naive. And, you kind of pictured it in terms of Carter as almost like an underling reporting to his boss, like, hey, look what I've done. I'm working on it. Like he's accomplishing his goals, and that Israel's kind of on the outside of it. And that, there's some evidence that Jimmy Carter also is himself, anti-Semitic. And that's part of the problem, perhaps, right? And just looking at all that, and then I remember the New York Times picture. Again, this is fast forwarding later during Clinton, but trying to picture Arafat later on as, like, I guess to a sense, the Egyptian president before him as a statesman, doing these things and winning Nobel Peace Prizes and all that. It just seems like it's a game, because it's like disingenuous is what it seems like.
Oh yeah, very much so. We were sold this bill of goods really in the late 70s about how Sadat was this great hero, this tremendous Gandhi-like man of peace. And really, he was just realizing that it was a different game, that he couldn't win on the battlefield, so he could win at the negotiating table with the help of the United States. And he played the game to the hilt. And even today, you go to Jerusalem and there's a Sadat Begin Center for Peace. He's lionized in Israel as a great hero for bringing peace. Well, it's because of Sadat that there is a problem in Gaza today, because Egypt, at the time of the Camp David Accords, had occupied Sinai, and that whole region was pacified, but gave it back under the Camp David Accords, and the Sinai became a hotbed of ISIS activity, and then they vacated Gaza in 2005 for peace, and that became a hotbed of Hamas activity, and now the problem has just metastasized.
Honestly, my little amateur reading is almost that Israel is basically so desperate for peace and doesn't always want to be seen as a bad guy, that sometimes they will make these deals that really aren't in their best interests. And I like the way you put it, and regarding two different things. One is that, you have the people who've lost these battles and lost these wars making demands about unconditional surrender, and the winner is ceding things, and Israel's basically giving up land, or being required or asked, depending on what negotiation we're talking about, to give up land basically just for promises of goodwill, not actually anything really tangible or substantive. And if you study the history of this, I feel like people will see it. But that's why your book's so important, because your book is the history of this. You got the quotes, you got the sources right there, you have the inside conversations that have now come to light, you have what was in the press at the time, you have all the important things right there. And yes, it's a dense read, but this is the way to educate yourself, everybody, about this. The Palestinian Delusion by Robert Spencer, written in 2019. Always timely, but maybe I'll say never more timely than right now. You want to get the book. I didn't even realize you had written it. And I know a lot of your stuff. I got a stack of Robert Spencer books right here. Then I got my critical Quran over there, and we've hung out and all that. And I'm like, man, he also wrote this book. Amazing. Now, if you're going to add some chapters to it, what chapters would need to be added to this book, The Palestinian Delusion?
Well, there would have to be one about the Abraham Accords, and then there would have to be one about what happened on October 7th. And of course, that story is still unfolding. But the Abraham Accords, a lot of people thought there's going to be peace in the Middle East. Trump's a genius. He has figured out a way to bring the Arabs and the Israelis together. And that is actually, there's a lot of truth to that. The thing is that it was always, and I actually do say this in the book because the Abraham Accords were just starting when I was writing it, that these are agreements that are between Israel and various Arab states based on ignoring what Islam teaches. And so some people will do that for pragmatic reasons at various points because there are pressing foreign policy reasons to ignore what Islam is all about just temporarily. But it will never be permanent. It's always going to be an alliance of convenience on a temporary basis. These Arab states are threatened by Iran. Israel is threatened by Iran, so they get together. But ultimately, there are always going to be pressures in those Arab states of people saying this is not Islamic. You're allying with the Zionist entity that's on Islamic land, and you got to drive them out. And so the Abraham Accords were always going to be a temporary measure. At the same time, if the Biden administration had not aided Iran so strongly since it came into power, then there might be a larger coalition today that would be on the side of Israel. But the Biden regime wanted to undercut the Abraham Accords because they were something that came from Trump.
Yeah, the situation there with Sadat, is it the case, the conventional wisdom I've always heard is that part of the rationale for his assassination was because fellow Muslims were upset that he had made concessions to Israel. Is that the case?
That's exactly the case. That was why he was assassinated. He would not have been assassinated. I don't know what would have happened to him. Maybe he would have been killed for some other reason at another time. But he would not have been assassinated when he was if it had not been for the Camp David Accords. That's why he was killed.
And now, like you mentioned, Iran is this heavyweight in the region. And my understanding is basically some of the other countries in the area are concerned, afraid about that. And so that's why sometimes some of them perhaps are normalizing relationships with Israel or things like that, is partially
That's
because
why.
of the threat given by Iran. Is that is the
Pretty
case?
much. Yeah, it's pretty much completely. That's why Bahrain is right there on the other side of the Gulf from Iran, and it is considered by the Islamic Republic of Iran to be the 15th province of the Islamic Republic. And
Oh,
so
really?
Bahrain, they actually claim it as their land, and the Bahrain has the Sunni leadership, but a majority Shiite population, about 55%. And so they're very nervous. And
Right, because Iran being Shia.
right. And Iran's right there, very close by.
What
I don't know
else
how.
are they afraid of? The people in the region, I'll put it, the leadership, the political leadership in the region around Iran. What are they afraid Iran's going to do? Like, it's not like Saudi Arabia thinks Iran's going to come take them over. Is it what exactly are their fears?
Saudi Arabia might think Iran's going to come take them.
Really? Yeah. Or maybe foment a revolution. Maybe that's
It's not as crazy as you might think. Think about this, Vocab. You got Iran, okay? And then you have Syria, which is ruled by the Alawites, and they owe their power to Iran. And then you have, that's less true than it was, but it's still true to a tremendous degree. Hezbollah runs Lebanon, and that's Iran. Hezbollah is a wholly owned and operated subsidiary of Iran. Iran funds Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And so all you've got in that region, in Iraq has a majority Shiite government in Baghdad. The Sunnis in the northern part of the country hate it, but that is the government of Iraq. It's essentially a satellite of Iran. So you've got Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Then you've got the whole eastern part of Saudi Arabia where the Shiites live. And that's also, like Bahrain, right across the Gulf from Iran itself. And so they're worried about them getting ideas about leading a separatist movement. You've got Bahrain, which is majority Shia, even though it's ruled by the Sunnis, and Dubai, the whole United Arab Emirates, also afraid of Iran taking over. So the whole region is Sunni states that are afraid of Iranian encroachment, and Saudi Arabia is right there, in the middle of all that, with a big Shiite minority, and so they could be they could be afraid that Iran will foment unrest that will result at very least in the fall of the House of Saud, if not in the actual separation of the eastern provinces and their incorporation into Iran, but that's also a possibility.
Okay, yeah, I definitely got some more questions for you. Robert Spencer, today's guest, author of the Palestinian Delusion 2019, very irrelevant, barely feels dated. There's just a couple more chapters he could add, and that's what we were discussing there. Shout out to the live chat. I see all of you. I do need all of you to hit that like button. Give me that thumbs up so we can get our numbers straight. And then I also need to make sure you leave a comment. Just at least let us know you're here in the live chat. And it's great if you can leave a comment underneath the actual video as well, outside of the live chat. Become a supporter of myself and of Robert Spencer, both on Patreon. And that's how these kind of conversations can happen, because Lord knows they're not going to be promoted for the most part in mainstream media. So I apologize, Robert Spencer, for getting a little bit too meta with current political things. Obviously, it's irrelevant because I really want to go back a little bit. We'll go back farther. But first, since you brought up Syria, I want to go back to that. Reading through your book, I did not realize the extent to which the area called Palestine by certain Arab Muslims in the area was essentially considered an extension of Syria. I knew about the Ottoman Empire element, not saying I knew all of it, but that was kind of a given. Help me understand more about Palestine being Syria. How did that happen? And am I the only one that feels like no one really understands that that was a key claim? That's kind of not even really known. It's not common knowledge. It's not talked about. Help me out here, because that was sort of a shocker, and yet it's all over your book with the evidence right there. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. Help us understand about that, because, like I said, it was a surprise.
Well, you're absolutely right in the first place. I think that the main thing people don't realize, because there's so much talk about Israel being on occupied territory, being an occupier, and so on, there was never a Palestinian state that Israel is occupying. There was the mandate for Palestine that was previously ruled by Britain before Israel declared independence. But that was not an independent Arab Palestinian state.
And was that called Mandatory Palestine? Was that the technical name?
Yeah. And the mandate for Palestine was specifically given by the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, to Britain for the purpose of establishing a Jewish national home. And so when people talk about Palestine and they have coins of Palestine and say, see, this was the Arab state, it was not an Arab state. It was the Jewish national home. And that's what it was dedicated for. Before that, it was Ottoman Empire territory, as you mentioned, and the Ottomans called that whole region South Syria. And when you look actually at the earliest Arab immigrants into the United States, they were often known as Syrians, because there was not really a distinction made in America at that time between Syrians and Arabs in general.
You're saying if somebody who was an Arab Muslim, say, left Bethlehem in 1920, that when they came to the United States, country of origin, Syria, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And
I just can't. I felt like I know something about this. Why is that such a gap in my knowledge? Or do you think it's very relevant? Even though it's surprising, is it very relevant? I'm just still surprised by that.
I think it's relevant because people don't realize there's really no Palestinian nationality at all. It was invented in the 60s by Yasser Arafat and the KGB as a rhetorical stick to beat Israel with. And that's all. Before that, there were Arabs, and there were the Jews, and there were Christians, and those are the people who lived in this region. And that's what they were known.
The Jews were called Palestinians at that time, correct?
Yeah, the Jerusalem Post, which is the main newspaper in Israel to this day, was called the Palestine Post before the state of Israel was declared. It was a paper that was run by Jews and was the Jewish news essentially for that region, the Palestine Post. And so the Palestinians did not exist as this separate Arab people. And they were often identified as Syrians. It was South Syria in the Ottoman Empire. And then in the 60s, the Palestinians were created. You read in 1948 all the literature, and I did a great deal of it when I wrote this book. Mm-hmm. The literature from the UN, when they partitioned the remaining area of the Mandate for Palestine to create Israel and a 23rd Arab state. And the literature from the Arabs of the day, rejecting that Arab state, and the Israelis establishing their Jewish state, and all the things that were going on, all the newspapers, all the controversies, all the meetings. Nobody mentions Palestinians. They did not exist. It was Israeli and the Israelis and the Arabs.
Utterly, utterly fascinating. Shout out to Jay Fry for the super chat. We need more of that. Keep it coming. I appreciate y'all very much. Now, Jennifer S., first live chat comment I'll put up there, said, keyword KGB. When I got to that part in the book, I said, is this a conspiracy theory? Was the KGB really involved with the creation of the
Yes.
Tell us about how that went down.
Well, remember, this is the Cold War period, and Israel was a foremost ally of the United States. And so the so-called Palestinian liberation movement is a creation of the KGB because they wanted to weaken Israel, because to weaken Israel would be to weaken the United States. And so Yasser Arafat and I believe Mahmoud Abbas too, but I'm not sure offhand. But many of the other Arab leaders, they studied in Moscow. The whole thing started out as a communist movement. You know that one of the oldest Arab terrorist groups is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, it works hand in glove with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and all the others. But the PFLP is actually a communist group. They're not an Islamic group. And the whole Arafat started, with his fatigues and all that, as like a revolutionary commando like Fidel Castro, and not like an Islamic leader like Osama bin Laden. It was only later in his career he started using Islamic rhetoric. It started out as a liberation movement of a people. And so they had to create the people because there were Arabs all over the place. And the Arabs did not want to. They could have solved this problem right away by accepting the Arabs who left voluntarily from Israel when Israel was created. But they refused them citizenship, not because they weren't Arabs. They were just Arabs who were culturally, religiously, linguistically, in every way similar to the Arabs of the whole region. But they did not want to give them citizenship because they wanted to keep their refugee status so they could keep on blaming Israel for their being refugees. And they created the Palestinians in the 60s to counter the popularity at that time that Israel had in the world as being the underdog, this tiny Jewish state against 22 massive Arab states and all the Muslim non-Arab states that all hated Israel. And so it was a master stroke, really, for the KGB and Arafat. They created an even smaller state, an even smaller nationality that was facing the gigantic Israeli war machine. And so it was by that they were able to co-opt public opinion and make people think, we have to save the oppressed Palestinians. But there were no Palestinians before.
Well, you brought this up in your book. Some may say, well, prior to 1948, there were no Israelis either. So, gotcha.
There were no Israelis, but there were Jews. As a matter of fact, there is this particular term, the Yishuv, for the Jews who lived in Israel before the creation of the modern state of Israel. And there were Jews there from time immemorial. The Romans in 134 AD, that is nearly 2,000 years ago, they expelled the Jews from the area called Judea, the land of the Jews, because they were tired of their revolting against their rule. And they renamed the region Palestine. There was never a Palestinian people. It was the name of a region like Staten Island or Harlem or something like that. And it only became a nationality, as I explained, much later. But when the Jews were expelled by the Romans in 134 AD, many of them never left. And there was a Jewish presence throughout history in that region. There were no Arabs there until the 7th century when they invaded and conquered, and they stayed until they were supplanted by the Turks. But the area was still largely empty in the 19th century. Mark Twain went there, other people went there, and they said you would go for miles without seeing a human being. A lot of the Arabs who now call themselves the indigenous Palestinians, are actually Arabs from elsewhere in the region. Even Arafat was born in Egypt, I think it was. And there are others who are from various different areas in the region. The Ottomans brought them there to counter the Zionist settling into the area. And a lot of them went there because the Jews actually worked hard and created jobs that they could take. And so they went there to get the jobs. And it's interesting that a lot of the Arab presence in this area comes from a reaction to Zionism. And then now they're claiming to be the indigenous people. They came there after the Zionists.
Well, let's talk about that, because sometimes you'll hear people on, I guess we'll say, sort of the raw, naked Palestinian side, because, ultimately as Christians, I hope we don't want innocents suffering and we don't want tragedy. And so I've never looked at it as just Israel always right or anything like that. But people just unequivocally, unashamedly, Palestine, that's all it is. That's what's going on. I hear them say things like, oh, we go back 3,000 years, or they'll sometimes give farther dates back. They'll say something like that. And by the way, shout out to Solitar Yimi for the super chat. And I see another one, and I'll get your question after this question, Tomer, for your super chat as well. But what about these claims? Well, we go back 3,000 years. You've heard this, I imagine, because I remember reading your book. So,
yeah, it's fictional. It actually comes from the Romans' choice of name for the region. The name of the region, as I noted, was Judea, and that's land of the Jews. The Jews, if you read in the Bible, when they come into that land, 3,000 BC or whatever it was, they fought the Philistines. Now that's the same word. That's the word that the Romans picked to call the region. They called it Philistine, Palestine. Now, the Palestinians have no connection to the ancient Philistines. The ancient Philistines, like the Hittites and Jebusites and all those other people that are mentioned in the Bible, they have long since died out. You're not going to meet a Hittite on the road today. There just aren't any Hittites, as far as I know. If there are any Hittites out there,
yeah, no, they're gone. We ran into their library, and that was a big treasure trove. But before that, on an apologetic level, Robert Spencer, some skeptics of the Bible were like, "What's this Hittite kingdom? It sounds like they got an empire. We never heard of them until we discovered a treasure trove of the literature written on rocks that was basically hidden away because they basically vanished as a distinct people group." So you're exactly right.
Yeah. And so did the Canaanites, the Philistines, all those people. They had long since vanished from history. The Romans picked the name out of the Bible just to needle the Jews by calling the land after the name of their ancient and long dead enemy. And so that's what's given the opening to the modern day Palestinians to claim that they're the original people of the land. But there's no connection. It's as if I were to call myself a Hittite today and say, see, I'm the original people from the region because I'm a Hittite. Well, I'm just making it up. And so are the Palestinians.
Or it'd be like, since Columbus thought he was somewhere he wasn't, so people who are native or indigenous to this side of the world over here called Indians, it'd be like if you were a Seminole and you go over to India and say, hey, that's my territory. I'm an Indian.
There you go.
Because so what you're telling me is basically it's all of us Italians' fault that this whole thing happened.
That's it, man. As always.
But let's go back. Let's say someone is agnostic regarding biblical prophecy. Let's literally take biblical prophecy out of it, because Christians have different perspectives on all this. So I'm not even saying you're secular or anything like that. And Tomer, I am going to get to your question. Take out biblical prophecy. Is there a way to think of the people who were in the land as Israelis having a right to the land from some kind of historical or other kind of political claim, regardless of anything having to do with religious or covenant? And What's the brief version of that case?
As a matter of fact, the Palestinian Delusion makes the case for Israel completely on the basis of history and international law. There is no argument made in there from biblical prophecy, because I wanted to rule that out right from the beginning, because so many people say, oh, you're just saying that Israel owns the land because of the Bible, and I don't believe in the Bible. And they think that's the end of the story. And so what you've got in the Palestinian Delusion is a case from history and from international law. The history we've been discussing, there was always a Jewish presence there. There's not any other people you could say were always there. It's clearly their ancestral land. There is abundant archaeological evidence of the ancient Jewish presence in the land. And people say, well, so what? Lots of people have been in various lands throughout history, and that doesn't give them a right to it. You're right. And so let's look at international law. Who owns the land? The Ottoman Empire was the last state that owned that land. And the Ottoman Empire fell not long after World War I. One of the last acts of the Ottoman Empire was to cede control of that territory to the League of Nations. And the League of Nations immediately gave it to Britain for the creation of the Mandate for Palestine. The idea was that the Mandate for Palestine would be to establish a Jewish national home, as we discussed before, on this territory that actually now comprises not just Israel, but also Jordan. The British didn't really want to do this, and they actually immediately detached the whole eastern part of the Mandate for Palestine and made the country of Jordan yet another Arab state. But they left the western part for the Jewish national home. Now, people say Israel's unoccupied territory, but actually they're just on the land that was set aside by the League of Nations for the Jewish national home. And so if any country owns that land, it's Israel. There is no other country that has a claim to it, according to international law.
Who owns Gaza? Who owns the West Bank?
According to international law, Israel does. But
Israel, I said that in a program, and someone in the comments said, no, that's internationally owned. What's the truth?
The truth is it's owned by Israel, but in the Oslo Accords in the 90s, they agreed that they would start making preparations for the territory that would be a Palestinian state, and that it would be in areas of the West Bank and Gaza. And so it's kind of an ambiguous situation now, with Israel giving up this territory for the creation of a Palestinian state, but there isn't any Palestinian state yet. And so it's autonomous under the Palestinian Authority. But technically, the last nation to own the land, according to international agreements that are still in force, is Israel, and only Israel.
What about the Golan Heights?
The Golan Heights is another thing, because the Golan Heights is part of the Mandate for Palestine, and so it should be Israeli territory. Now, what happened with the Golan Heights was that the 1948 war left Israel without Gaza, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, that was renamed the West Bank by Jordan, and the Golan Heights. And Israel claimed all three, but Syria occupied the Golan Heights, Jordan occupied Judea and Samaria and renamed it the West Bank, and Egypt occupied Gaza. And so the three territories were then taken by Israel after the 1967 war, when Israel defeated all those countries and took over those areas for its own security. And this was a very much an obvious national security issue when it came to the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights, last time I was in Israel, we took a boat across Lake Tiberias in the Galilee, and then had a very nice lunch at a restaurant north of Lake Tiberias. You ever been up there, Vocab?
No, I actually had it all set up. Well, someone else had it set up for me, because they wanted some Christian YouTubers to be able to go to Israel and, have some good kind of PR with the Israeli government footing the bill, basically. but then COVID happened.
Ah, yes. Well, I hope you get there sometime. I think some guy is right. Yeah. I'm sorry. I got to retract. Golan Heights was not part of the mandate. It was Syria. But in the 1967 war, it was occupied by Israel for security reasons. And this is very important because if you go to Lake Tiberias and you look at, and you're in that restaurant, go to the restaurant that's north of Lake Tiberias, great place. And you will look up and you see the heights. There is a very steep incline, not very far from where you are at that place. And people told me, you see, that's the Golan Heights. And the Syrian soldiers used to stand there at the top and shoot at the Israeli farmers in the Galilee. And so it was impossible to sustain.
Hmm.
The Israelis couldn't use that area, and they don't have much land to start with because anytime they would go there, they'd get shot at. And so the Golan Heights was occupied by Israel after the 67 war, and that removed the threat from all of northern Israel, essentially, and enabled the Israelis to cultivate that area peacefully. And this is why it was a peaceful area when I was there. And we went up into the Golan Heights themselves and looked into Syria, and it's right there. It's a very important strategic area because if Israel controls it, it has a measure of security for its own territory. If Syria controls it, then it can threaten a large area of northern Israel. So Israel annexed it. Now, in the history of war, throughout history, vocab, there are countries that have taken territory from other countries after wars in order to protect themselves in view of future wars. Look at the map of Germany. Germany was much bigger before World War II than it was after. Why? It lost territory to Poland, to the Soviet Union, to France, to Denmark, because it started a war and lost it. And these countries wanted to protect themselves against future wars by a resurgent Germany. Now,
There's the difference is everyone must remember Israel's in defensive wars. People were attacking them, and
yeah,
then they're and I
that
remember you said
Israel,
something in your book. You said that the troops just happened to be in those places. Kind of,
yes, that's
yeah,
why they were able to occupy those territories
yeah.
after 48. But the thing is, see, Poland and Denmark and France, they were taking territory from Germany to protect themselves. And they had every right to, and everybody recognized it in the world. Even Germany recognizes it and does not claim those territories. Now, Israel takes Golan Heights, and the whole world says, no, you can't do that. You have to give it back. Why? Every country in the world, when it wins a war, a defensive war in particular, it's understood they take territory from the country that started the war and lost. I can give you innumerable examples throughout history, not just Germany. Look at Bolivia and Paraguay in South America. Study their borders, and you'll see they've lost territory because they started wars against their neighbors. They lost them. They lost territory.
Yeah, the world
Anyway,
wants Israel to be like the person who just, and this analogy is not perfect, but they catch the fish, but just always throw them back.
yeah, yeah, it's taken for granted that it's okay everywhere, but not Israel. So Trump
Someone. Oh, go ahead.
recognized,
Finish. Sorry.
just briefly, Trump recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, and that was altogether fitting and proper. But Biden rolled it back, and so they're considered occupied territory by Israel that belongs to Syria, and Israel will be pressured to give it back. But Israel refuses to do so, and quite rightly, it's a matter of their own security.
Yeah, I remember you talked about before one of the wars, Israel at one point, one part of the country was only 8 miles wide.
Yeah, that's right. That's the 1948 borders that
Yeah.
the Palestinians are saying, we want you to go back to the 1948 borders. Well, they're not formal borders. They're just, like you said, where the armies were when the fighting stopped in 1948. And Israel is only 8 miles wide at the smallest extent. That's hardly defensible.
You said, just like you said, I take it you like it when I quote your book. At least when I get it right. So, White Lily asks, why do some, I'll put it that way, ignore the obvious history? I was even told by a Palestinian that Egypt never occupied Gaza.
Well, Egypt did occupy Gaza. You can find that pretty easily from 1948 to 67. And the thing about why Arabs ignore it is because it doesn't work to their advantage. And so they don't want people to know these truths because they don't help the Arab case.
Yeah, and it's tough. And I think you brought this up. Others, no, you didn't hear a worldwide outcry when Egypt occupied Gaza.
No, and that's very interesting. That supposedly the Palestinians are suffering this terrible occupation, and all they want is their independence. And yet you didn't hear a peep, not a word, about how the Palestinians were suffering under an occupation when Egypt occupied Gaza and Jordan occupied Judea and Samaria. Nobody seemed to mind. It's not that the occupation was humane and Israel's is inhumane. It's that Israel is a Jewish state and those are Muslim states. And so the idea is to create not really to create an independent Palestine, but to expand the territory of Islam. So they were fine when Egypt and Jordan ruled those areas.
Why did Israel give back Sinai?
That was part of the Camp David Accords. It was negotiated. In exchange for peace with Egypt and Jordan, they would give back the Sinai. It's been a very uneasy peace, though. Egypt is a hotbed, in particular, of anti Semitic propagandizing, and people generally hate Israel there. Egypt has not kept up its part of the deal to try to limit the spread of anti Semitism in the country. And it's really just Egypt is paid by the United States not to fight against Israel. That's basically it.
Really? How's
Yeah.
that work?
Oh, well, they get aid. They get billions of dollars every year from the U.S. government. And so part of the deal is it would all be off if they attack Israel, so they don't attack Israel.
What's your opinion of pro-Palestinians who say Israel wants to create a greater Israel?
That's a paranoid fiction that has no basis in fact. If you actually look at what the Israeli state has done, it's given up all these territories that it occupied. It occupied the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, and has given back a great deal of it for the creation of the Palestinian Authority and ultimately a Palestinian state. It withdrew from Gaza in 2005 and forcibly uprooted the Jews who had settled there and were building lives there, and seized their homes and their livelihoods, gave $14 million worth of greenhouses to the Palestinians, who immediately gutted them and made them into Hamas weapons smuggling tunnels.
Yeah, I remember I heard about that, and I was just, I mean, Jordan. Do you think that Jordan should rightfully be Israel's? Are there Israelis who think that? For example, in regards to Jordan.
There might be because Jordan was part of the original mandate for Palestine. And so there might be some, but it's not as if the state of Israel has plans to attack and incorporate Jordan. That's just absolute anti Semitic fantasy.
And they have relatively normalized relations with Jordan, correct?
Yeah, it's an uneasy peace, and there's a lot of angry anti Israel rhetoric coming out of Jordan, particularly in regard to the Al Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. But they don't invade, so that's what the Camp David Accords were designed to bring about.
Jordan is basically, it looks like, my understanding, ancient Edom. I mean, I'm not saying it's one and the same, but in roughly that general territory, and I think Moab as well. It's interesting
Yeah, it's a bunch of Arab colonizers, though.
Yeah, because they came later. What was it? 9th century BC, I think.
The Arabs.
No, I said it wrong. I'm sorry. Hold on. What was it? 900 years BC. I forgot what it was now, but it was much later, the first Arab presence in that area, like the Nabateans and whatnot. I don't know why I said
Oh,
9th century. That's too far back. I think I meant to say 900 years, but now I'm confusing myself.
well, it's not the Nabateans either that are the key, because really the ongoing Arab presence in the area only dates from the invasions in the 7th century AD.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and that may have something to do with Islam.
Yeah, a little bit. Islam wasn't invented yet, but it attached to those invasions.
Tomer, going to a different part of the conversation, but I want to answer this. Can you talk about the influx of Arabs when the British took over as laborers?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I did refer earlier to the fact that the area was largely empty and that a lot of Arabs started to come into the area of the Mandate for Palestine because the Jews were establishing businesses and hiring people. And so paradoxically, they went there because of the Jews that they then claimed were interlopers and they were the indigenous people.
Hmm. Now, fast forwarding back again, if you were the person who made bets and predictions, what do you see coming out of what's happening right now? Because we're literally in the end of it, or in the middle of it. I'm sorry. Obviously, Israel hasn't even went in there on foot. You know, do you have any things you could see if you did a Doctor Strange and look at possible outcomes? What are you seeing?
Well, okay, one possible outcome is a world war, and that could easily happen. The United States, even with our ridiculously uh, wrongheaded and anti American regime that's in power now, they are sending American forces over to that region. And I don't know if they intend to get involved. I think that would be a disaster. For one thing, our military is drastically unprepared and overcommitted, and the Israelis don't need our help. They just need us to get out of the way. And yet, if we do get involved, then there'll probably be a world war over it. On the other hand, it's much more likely, I think, that the Americans will just prevail upon the Israelis to stop and to not even mount the ground invasion of Gaza. And this is because, of course, they're really on their side. They gave $148 million to the Palestinians just before this bloody massacre on October 7th. They gave $6 billion to Iran, and Iran is behind this. And so the likelihood is that the pro Hamas, pro Palestinian Biden regime will prevail upon Israel to stand down, and then that just kicks the problem down the road. There will still be Hamas, and it'll happen again later.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, well, Hamas needs to be rooted out of Gaza, and I think that's what Israel has in mind. But what's step two?
Step two would have to be the creation of some kind of a situation that would prevent Hamas or something like it from recurring. And that is extraordinarily difficult because that takes you right into Islam and the fact that there will always be jihadis as long as there are believers in the Quran and Muhammad and Islam. And so once Hamas is gone, it will take them a while to regroup, but they will regroup. And how are you going to deal with that? I think one way ultimately would be to confront the idea, the fiction of the Palestinians to begin with. Israel never should have accepted it. It accepted it under pressure at the Camp David Accords, but ultimately that was a big mistake, that it should be rolled back. And once you acknowledge that the people in this area are Arabs who are not any different from the Arabs of Lebanon or Syria or Jordan, then you can prevail upon Lebanon and Syria and Jordan to try to alleviate this problem by ending their adversarial rejection of Arab Palestinian people, Palestinian Arabs, and make it so that they accept them, that might be a genuine path to peace, but you would have to have the cooperation of these governments, which is almost certainly not going to happen.
Someone in the live chat thinks Israel should place a government of their own choosing in Gaza to prevent Hamas from forming again.
That's not a bad idea. That might work, at least for a while.
Miguel Clash, shout out to my paisan, says Islamic eschatology will factor in the current conflict at all? Do Muslims think they're bringing about the end times through jihad?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm sure that virtually everyone watching this is probably familiar with the famous genocidal hadith, Sahih Muslim 29:22. The last day will not come until Muslims kill Jews, and the Jews will hide behind trees, and the trees will call out, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Now, the Palestinian Authority just invoked that hadith. And so that's very serious. They're saying it's time now to kill Jews to bring about the end times. Very important. Read it again. Sahih Muslim 29:22. The last day will not come until Muslims kill Jews. Now, this is very important because a lot of people think, oh, this is just some eschatological thing. This is something for the last day. No, it's for now. It's saying the last day will not come until Muslims kill Jews. So you want the last day to come? You want to meet Allah and see the total victory of Islam? Kill some Jews. And
It's a way to hasten the day.
Bring it on. That's right. That's what it'll do.
Your book indicates that certain strands of Islamic thought also teach that killing a Jewish person is an act of worship that enables one to experience closer intimacy to Allah. I mentioned that to a few friends of mine, and they denied that.
Well, they're lying. They're either lying or they're ignorant. The fact is that Hamas spokesmen have been abundantly clear about that. There is a Hamas spokesman. You can find the video. I don't remember his name right now, but you can find the video at the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI.org. And they have all kinds of videos from the Arab media. And one of them, you've got a Hamas guy, and he's praying, actually. And he says to Allah, "You have made our killing of Jews an act of worship." And there was a music video, incongruously, of music video some years back of that Hamas put out that said the same thing. Killing Jews is an act of worship of Allah. And we actually took that line and put it on advertisements at the time when Hamas was when CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, was saying jihad was peaceful, and they were running these ads that said, "My jihad is getting the kids to school on time. My jihad is hitting the gym regularly," and stuff like that. And so we made ads that said real jihad quotes from real jihadis. And one of them was, "You've made killing Jews an act of worship," from this Hamas music video. And we actually had news reports that should have known better saying that we made that up. And you can find that also. Look up Hamas music video at the Middle East Media Research Institute. These things are real. They really do say and spread the idea that it is an act of worship of Allah to kill Jews.
So what if someone says, well, yeah, that's Hamas saying that, but Islam doesn't teach that?
Well, that's where Hamas gets it. Hamas is 100% Islamic.
Well, we just say their interpretation's wrong.
Well, maybe their interpretation's wrong. I don't really care if their interpretation's right or wrong. I'm not in the business of saying who's right or wrong among Muslims. And what I'm in the business of, though, is understanding what ideas are influencing jihadis to act in violent ways. 70% of the people in Gaza voted for Hamas, and 57% of them still support Hamas, according to a recent poll. And so those people either believe that Hamas is right, that killing Jews is a kind of sacramental act, is a kind of a holy thing, or else they don't care and they're okay with the idea because they're okay with Hamas. But there are hadith that say things like this. There are hadith that say Allah will give every Muslim a Jew or Christian on the day of judgment. And so people have wondered, what does that mean? He'll give them a Jew or Christian. And a lot of people have understood this. As a matter of fact, I had a Shiite Muslim who had converted to Christianity explain to me that it's very clear, it's understood among Muslims, a Jew or Christian to kill. And there have been indications of that, even in the United States. There was a guy in Houston some years ago, and he had a Jewish friend, a Muslim guy. And he and the Jewish guy were best friends. But at one point, the Muslim killed the Jew and then ran out into the street saying, I have killed my Jew. I will go to paradise.
Oh boy. I'm answering or putting this next question on the screen only because it was a super chat. People were asking if I dressed up just because Robert always is. Well, listen, if you look at other live streams, you'll see other times where I have a collar or a shirt. Not all the time like Robert, but you will find them. But since I knew Robert would, today definitely should be one of those streams where I do as well. The sense I get from you, Robert Spencer, is that, I don't know, you want to be alive in London like in the 1800s or something. You know, like you're a man from another era.
Maybe so. I'm way too dressed down for London in the 1800s.
Something like that.
Top hat and cane.
Well, maybe you'd like that, something like that. Because I remember when I was reading. Is that right? Would you? What era would you pick?
Oh, if I picked any era to live in, it would be 9th century Constantinople.
Oh,
so I'd be wearing a bedsheet or something. I don't know.
You want to be part of the Byzantine Christendom?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I happen to have right here a copy of Empire of God.
What?
How the Byzantines Saved Civilization, which is my new book that will be out on November 21st. It is available now for pre-order. It's a substantial book, you can see. It's a history of the Byzantine Empire and shows all the many things they have given us that people do not realize nowadays.
What do I got to do to get a physical or digital interview you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Send me your address. I'll get you one right out.
Now, this is going to be tough because I respect lots of parts of the Byzantine Empire, probably for the book reasons you're going to lay out. I'm sure, obviously, there's going to be way more than I know. But when I run into these Eastern Orthodox guys online,
like me,
I don't mean like you. I mean like people that probably like you that I don't like because they're so rude. These I
got to say, I'm not tied into that world. I'm not disavowing them. I don't know who you're talking about, but I'm just not involved with Orthodox apologetics online, so I really am not familiar. I did write a book when I came back to the Orthodox Church in 2015. I wrote a book a few years, actually just came out last year, called The Church and the Pope, explaining the Orthodox case over against the Roman Catholic one. But otherwise, I have not been involved, so I don't know these guys.
Nah, I got you. It's all good. It's all very important and all interesting, and that's funny that you picked that time. I remember when I think my favorite little line in your book, I don't know why, it caught my attention when you're talking about people coming up with these, in their kind of imagination, nefarious ways that Jewish people had acquired land prior to the 1948, coming into Palestine through these underhanded, nefarious ways. And you said something along the lines of, actually, the means were much more prosaic. They bought it.
Yep. That's what happened.
That's a loose quote to that effect, but I just like the use of the word prosaic in that context. I don't know.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to pay attention. Now let's get to some questions from the audience. This is great talking to you. We could go on forever, but let's try to do a couple audience Q&A. Some of these are going to be not on your side. So here we go. Hamas was created by the Zionists, all caps, during the 80s by way of divide and conquer. Tell the truth, Robert.
Yeah, I think, come on, you can't really believe that. Let's think about this
Well, I've
for a
heard a bunch of
minute.
people say this, by the way.
Yeah, it's very common.
Yeah.
And I actually answered this a few days ago on another show. I hope I do it as well today. If I do say so myself, I thought, wow, that was the answer right there. I should save that one because it really sets it all out. But let's see if I can remember some of the main points of this. The idea is that Israel wanted to create a counterweight to the PLO, and they ended up creating one that is based on Islam. And it's so well based on Islam, even though it's made by Jews. It's based so convincingly on Islam that it got 70% of the vote in Gaza, and it has the support of the Islamic Republic of Iran and of other Muslims around the world. Now, when people make false flags, they're generally not that good at it. If they're not in the thing, like after 9/11, there were some undercover FBI guys who went into mosques in the United States trying to find jihadis, and they would go into the mosques, with their kufis and their jalabas, these big dumb white guys, and they would say, "Hey fellas, we gotta get the kufar, don't we?" And they just stuck out like sore thumbs.
Remind
And
that. Have you ever seen that meme with Steve Buscemi, and he's got a skateboard over his back, and he's got a backwards hat? Hey, fellas! Hey, kids! What's going on?
greetings, fellow kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like that. Greetings, fellow jihadis. And so all the Muslims knew that these guys weren't real.
Allahu Akbar. Am I right?
Yeah. And they just weren't very good at pretending to be Muslim. Look, I tell you, I've been studying this stuff for 40 years, and my face is too well known. If my face were not known and I were going to go undercover, I would do a lot of preparing beforehand. And you would think, well, you've been doing this for 40 years. You know this stuff. Yes, I know Islamic theology better than a lot of the Muslims in the local mosque. But if I go in there and try to do day-to-day Muslim stuff, I haven't been doing that. I have no reason to study it. I'm not going to get it right unless I really work hard at it. And the feds, the problem is they're too bound up with political correctness, and they don't have enough. They don't even know what they don't know, and they got it all wrong. But Israel is supposed to have been so good at a false flag that it created this thing that perfectly fooled pretty much all the most powerful Muslim entities in the world that are now on their side. It would seem like if you wanted to create a fake group that is going to neutralize your opposition, then you do like the Democrats did in the United States, and you co-opt the Republicans, so that now remember the Harlem Globetrotters, the basketball team that won all the games, and they would play the Washington Generals, and they were showboaters. They would do all these tricks with the ball, and it was a show. But the part of the show was always in the context of the Globetrotters win, the Washington Generals lose. And it's like the Republicans. The Republicans are the Washington Generals, and the Democrats are the Harlem Globetrotters. I don't want to make this political. I'm just saying that you have an opposition. The best kind of opposition is a controlled opposition, like Mitch McConnell, where he just does whatever the Democrats do. He just wants to do it a little different, or maybe a little cheaper, or whatever. So if Israel had created Hamas, you would expect them to want to do essentially what Israel does, and go to the Muslims and say, hey, we really ought to get with Israel on this. They're really right about this. That would be what you would expect from a false flag group, not an even more vicious and venomous group that wants to kill Israelis all the more. And so it
What
just
I've
doesn't
heard
hold.
is maybe the modified version as well. Not that Israel created them intentionally, but maybe inadvertently by their activities, step one. And then step two, we're more than willing to use them against other groups who are enemies of Israel, similar to maybe how the United States did with the 80s against Russia with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. What about that? Because nations do that kind of thing. That's not totally.
That could be. If they did that, it was a big mistake. And it doesn't mean that Hamas is not real or that Israel shouldn't fight against Hamas. Israel's not perfect, and if they did that, they shouldn't have, and they probably realize that now.
All
If that
right.
happened.
Carm, she's a supporter. She asked if you could give Carm M a shout out, Robert Spencer.
Hello, Carm M. Is that a shout out? I'm so dumb. I'm an old guy,
That
vocab. You gotta.
works.
Okay, I know nothing.
You're popular amongst the kids because you were in Islamicize Me.
Greetings, fellow kids.
April asks, why do some people say the current conflict is about the settlements in the West Bank?
They've been thoroughly propagandized, and they believe what the media tells them. If there were no settlements in the West Bank and Israel were the size of a parking lot, the Palestinians would still be waging jihad against it, because any land that belongs to Islam at one point belongs by right to Islam forever. Drive them out from where they drove you out. These things are not negotiable, not based on the size of Israel, not based on the activity of Israel, only based on the fact of Israel.
That's good. That almost sounds like a quote that should be in your book as well. That was good. I like that. Shout out to Vanessa for the not the super chat. I'm sorry, but the Cash App. Shout out. Thank you very much. Your book, if someone picks it up, The Palestinian Delusion, what will they gain? What will they be able to do with the current situations and conversation and understanding? What will they gain from reading and hopefully retaining some of it?
They'll be able to deal with the propaganda. They'll be able to see through the propaganda and counter a lot of the lies that are being told in the establishment media today. Like just that last question about the settlements, that people think, oh, this is all just if Israel gives up some land, gives up the settlements, then there'll be peace. It's not the case. And they'll be able to answer that. They'll be able to see where that comes from and what the real story really is.
Excellent. Excellent. So it's not just Islam and the fact that folks want a global community, ummah, that's all Muslim all the time, across a geopolitical swath, starting and then branching out even farther into the House of Islam becomes complete, as it were. It's a totalizing worldview goal there. It's also this idea, and you've mentioned it several times, but drive them out if they drive them out as they drove you out. Now, you said that, of course, that's a fiction, but I don't hear people talking about that unless they're informed of these issues, as they probably should talk about that. Can you again reiterate the importance, this idea of like, okay, we were here, so now we got to drive you out because this was once ours in some capacity? Isn't that just kind of like, it just seems like it makes it absolutely impossible to have peace, regardless of everything else.
It does make it impossible to have peace. Look at the Pakistani flag, the Saudi flag. There are probably others that I'm not thinking of right now, but the green color. Why are so many Islamic flags of Islamic countries, green, vocab? Why do they like green?
Green is peace.
Nope.
I know it's not the answer because the same flags, at least one of them has swords on it too, but go ahead.
Green is springtime. And springtime is the time of growth. Islam is always in spring. Islam is growing. The idea of Islam is to grow. In chapter 8, verse 39 of the Quran, it says, fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. And so you got to fight them forever until religion is all for Allah. And so Islam is always expanding, always growing, always in springtime, and the infidels are always decreasing. And so that's the idea here, that any land that belongs to Islam, at one point, Islam owns it now forever. And that's the idea of drive them out from where they drove you out. And so it's a command before Allah. As important as the Ten Commandments are for Christians, you got to do it. It's not something that's negotiable.
Well, even though I appreciate your realism that you bring, it's possible someone could get depressed if they listen to you too much.
I was just told that on the last show I was on a few minutes ago. I've been spreading gloom today, but there's always hope, We know, of course, in the end, there will be the victory of all that is good. But in the meantime, we always go on and hope, as Thomas More actually said, the times are never so bad that a good man cannot be good in them. And so
Amen.
here we are.
Amen. That's good. That's good. I appreciate that. All right. We're gonna have to end there. There's so much more, but let me give a shout out to White Lily for the last super chat. Everyone, please pick up The Palestinian Delusion by Robert Spencer, today's guest. Robert, thank you so much for coming on, and I do look forward to interviewing you on your next book about the
Thank you.
The Empire of God.
Yes, and we'll get you a copy.
Excellent. All right. God bless. Have a beautiful day. Thanks for joining. Guys, I'll see you again Thursday. Anthony Rogers and I are going to be on live, and we're going to look in detail at the Hamas charter. Don't want to miss that. See you soon. Street Apologist Live is out.